A funny bone. A laughing stock. Huh? Yeah, I know. So basically this is an hour of terrible jokes. You're stuck here now, so SOL, huh? No. Welcome. My name is Ari. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for joining us for the 11th annual Denver Startup Week. I think this is maybe my 8th presenting, so I'm really excited about Startup Week and being an attendee and a presenter and the value that this brings. Thank you to our sponsors, Amazon, Capital One Cafe, Dell for Startups, and the Downtown Denver Partnership. This is the design track, sponsored by the Public Works, one of our 8 programming tracks aimed at supporting the entire entrepreneurial team. By attending the session, you're agreeing to follow our code of conduct, listen to my terrible jokes, as well as be photographed laughing at my terrible jokes. That is a requirement, or be recorded on video. Be sure to share your experiences at the session online using Denver Startup Week hashtag, as long as they are positive. I mean, that's not really true, but you know. Cool. Our sponsors, again, really appreciate them putting in the time and effort and money to make this really amazing event possible. And our headline sponsors. My name is Ari Weissman, and I want to talk to you about UX. Hopefully that is what you're here to learn about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. I want to tell you what is UX, a little bit about the design process, how we measure experience, and then kind of sum it all up for what's the point and allow you to ask some questions. I currently am a director for a company called Bluecore that's based out of New York. We help with personalization We allow large brands to better communicate with consumers through a personalized experience. And I can talk more about that if you want, but I'm here to talk about UX in general. I have been UXing things for now, I don't know, close to 18 years. I started in product. I went into agency life for quite a while, worked across a huge variety of sectors. I have taught UX, most recently at General Assembly, one of the boot camps. And I have had responsibility for, whether in management or personally, of everything from product strategy, roadmap, discovery, understanding how do we service a user, all the way through delivery of those experiences. Ooh, falling over. That was not part of the plan. If you do have questions, I'm trying something new. There's a new app that I found. It's called Slido. If you go to Slido and you type in that number, you're able to ask questions, and then at the end, and you can also vote on other questions, so at the end I'll be able to pull that up and I can go through all of the questions. As we go, if you do have questions, raise your hand, but I talk a lot, so I'm going to try and get through it all quickly to leave a lot of time for Q&A. So that'll be a great opportunity, and also you can vote on questions so we can know which one's the most valuable for the largest amount of people. All that to say, I'm really freaking excited to talk about UX. I love this stuff. I don't get to get up on my UX soapbox enough, so thank you for being a captive audience. I think UX is the bee's knees. I think it's really important for product development, whether that product is how do you design a hospital to make sure all of the different user types are successful in whatever their journey is, or developing and designing a digital product, which is where I spend most of my time. So what is UX? It's a thing with many names, and it has evolved over time. You've probably heard of user experience. You might have heard of UCD, user-centered design, usability, service design, experience architecture, interaction design, human factors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Each of those has some meaning, but they fall under the larger umbrella of UX. So what is it? One definition: the central premise of user-centered design, UCD, what the cool kids are calling it, is that the best designed products and services result from understanding the needs of the people who will use them, right? And probably makes sense. User experience, you need the user, right? So the best way to design is by understanding the needs of the people that you're designing for. Another good definition is the design of anything independent of medium or across devices with human experience as an explicit outcome and human engagement as an explicit goal. We right now are having a user experience. Hopefully it's a good one, right? I am providing a service, you are consuming the room, the screen, the microphone, right? All of this is a user experience that has been designed. Some would argue well, some not, right? But there's no no user experience. It's just if you choose to pay attention to it. And it's not about just desktop, it's about mobile, it's about tablet, it's about designing that library experience or hospital experience. It's about the experience you have in your car collectively from the steering wheel to the digital UI, right? User experience is holistic, not just screens. Design is not what it looks like. Design is how it works. Frequently, people think about user experience and conflate it with UI. Just make it pretty, right? It's not just about how pretty it is. It's about how well does it work, because we can have beautifully designed things that are unusable, right? And it's about how it feels, too. Think about the difference in a really quality knife, right, or juicer, or some of your kitchen implements, like how well they're designed. Well, you know the ones that feel cheap, right? And like it's hard to say why, but you can feel it, right? And you know. It's the same for websites. It's hard to articulate. And if you become a designer, you'll find some of those things that move the needle from one side to the other. But it is really like about how it feels at like a intuitive level. And so let's talk about that. And let's talk about the history of usability and user experience. Started out way back long ago in, I guess, the 60s and 70s. We started making digital things. And the fact that they worked was freaking amazing, right? We have computers. Amazing, right? Really great. And that was table stakes. The thing was functional. And then we realized as we had more and more and more, it needed to work repeatedly, right? Because if you have a car and it only works the first time, how successful of a purchase is that? Not great, right? Same with software. It needs to be reliable, it needs to continue to work, and it needs to continue to work the same way each time. So we have these technical things now that were functional, and they were somewhat reliable, and we moved from DOS to Windows, right? And they became usable for people who didn't need a PhD or who didn't know how to, use command line code to get something to open. And so we moved into usable, and then this is where we started moving from, let's say, development-driven to having a foundation for usability, and we started having usability experts in these software organizations. And then, right, we had those table stakes, and then it needed to be convenient, right? And this is where we really start talking about what user experience is, and where I get really excited. Because you can create something that is usable, but if it's not convenient, right, if I wanted to book an Airbnb, but I needed to go down to the 7-Eleven to the red box to book it, right, just like we used to be able to go and rent DVDs, right, that's not convenient for me. It might be convenient for someone who goes to 7-Eleven every morning to get their coffee, right? And that's a really important point as we go up the pyramid here. What is pleasurable for me? What is meaningful for me? Many organizations, as they're designing, right, regardless of medium, are targeting usable, maybe convenient. But when we talk about a great experience, we talk about enabling pleasure, we talk about enabling meaningful experiences. And what does that mean, right? It's really hard to say. With iTunes, the meaningful experience is not I click on music, it's I get to listen to the music, right? Is the experience that the iTunes UI enables. With Airbnb, the meaningful experience is I get to go on vacation with my family in a really cool place, right? With, what are the other examples? With REI, right? It's not that they have an e-commerce site, whoop-de-doo, right? It's that I get to get this new climbing, a descender. I go canyoning. I get to get a new descender that I'm going to try out, and I'm really excited about that, and that is meaningful for me. They enable meaningful experiences. For the things you're designing, that's going to be different, and let me tell you, that is very hard. I'm not suggesting it's easy to get to the top, but as you're thinking about user experience, as you're thinking about designing experiences, aim for the top. Think about the top. Think about what that means. So I want to talk about, I'm talking about what UX is and what's exciting about it, what it can be. I really want to clarify what it's not because, as I mentioned, it can be misconstrued. It's not just make it pretty. It is very not just make it pretty. Every time someone asks a designer to just make it look pretty, a baby kitten dies, right? Twitter is a goldmine. I love this quote. We're not actually hurting kittens, I promise. But it is so much more than just being a beautiful thing because we don't want beautiful things, we want useful things. And if you can make it useful and beautiful, right, and meaningful, you're going to get adoption. Craigslist is one of my favorite examples. It is brutally useful and convenient It's not pretty, right? But it gets the job done. And then as soon as something comes along, like, Amazon came along and it doesn't quite, where am I going with this? Amazon came along, right? It's not quite local, but it took away some of the business, right? Because it was far more convenient and you had a much broader range of options. Don't just make it look pretty. Also, don't do this. Who knows what this is? Thank you. You all should know. And every year, I love this example, and every year when I talk about it, fewer and fewer people know, and it makes me cry. But hopefully you can recognize Homer Simpson, right? Homer Simpson had a long-lost brother who owned a car company, his half-brother Herb. And Herb said, look, Homer is the everyman. And he said to his designers, his car designers at Powell Motors, anything Homer says, I want you to build. Anything this user says, he is the everyman, I want you to build the car that Homer wants. And so Homer asked for 2 bubble domes, one for the adults, one for the kids. Homer asked for optional restraints and muzzles for the kids. He asked for a horn that plays La Cucaracha. He wanted giant cup holders, right? He wanted all of these things. He wanted shag carpet. And they released it. And the price tag was, I don't know, a couple of $100,000, and no one bought it. And what was the problem here? We listened to our users, right? Herb, his brother, said, listen to your users, give them what they want, right? That is not what UX is either. It is not give people what they want. It is listen to them, but really understand the subtext and give them what they need. So to be clear, UX is not focus groups and aspirations. It's not get a bunch of people in the room, ask for features, and deliver on those things. It's not about how do you feel about this thing, because I feel differently about things every day, right? Ari, are you going to go to the gym? Absolutely. I've been saying that for 2 years. Have I? Shame. Shame, I know. It's not a task or a phase. You can't say to someone, hey, can you go UX this for me? Any more than you can say, hey, can you go aerospace this for me? Right? That'd be pretty ridiculous. It's not expert design, right? User experience must include the user. There are some very good designers, and look, in my job we have to do it too, where we have to move quickly, and we do expert design because those are the decisions we make, right? But it's not UX. Right? It is not like the great process that we want to embody. Without the user, you're not going to get good outcomes. You may learn lots of things, right? You may design and then take it to the user and learn, right? How you organize your process is up to you, and you can do that. But no user, no UX. And it's not usability, right? Usability is the bottom of that pyramid, and we want to be up at the top. Does that make sense? Yeah? Do you want another joke? What do you call a lazy doctor? Dr. Doolittle. Yeah, it's good. I'm telling you, it's not getting better. So what is UX? UX is research-based, generative research, understanding problems and evaluating solutions. Research-based is user, right? It's not research talking to your CEO or the product manager. It is talking to the people that are going to use your system. And there is a clear distinction between some of this research for marketing and UX, right? My marketing team loves to talk to the chief marketing officer, who is the buyer for our platform. And while I am very interested in getting their money, right, I also want to be a counterpoint, because the things that matter to the chief marketing officer are not the same as the things that matter to the director of email channel, right? And while our team is really focused on both, one of my personal dreams, right, is making these director of marketers more successful so that they're really excited about our product and want to buy it when they become chief marketing officers. Can I make better marketers because of our platform? Can I get them promoted to be eventually our buyer? So there's a difference there. It's analytical and probing. It's about asking questions. It's not about order taking. It's what does this request mean? Right? Why do you want this? Why do you want that? What does that mean? What are you trying to achieve? What is your goal? It's a process, right? You can't just wave your magic wand. And it's cross-departmental. You cannot create a great user experience without buy-in from the engineering team, without buy-in from the product team, without buy-in from the marketing team. We're going to talk about why these things are valuable, right? And getting buy-in from our users and our purchasers. It's about behaviors, needs, and goals. So when designing a product, right, I like is not as helpful in making decisions as I do. right? Asking people how they will act is a terrible way to make decisions. Asking people how they have acted is a much better indicator of future activity. Instead of asking for I want, right? Ask what do you need to be successful? You said you want to do this. What are the things that you're missing, or what are the things that you need right now to do these things? And can we change those? Can we deliver better ways of solving those needs? I wish is not as helpful as I need to accomplish, right? The thing that's going to make me happy, the thing that's going to make me successful today, the thing that's going to make me successful this month or this quarter. What are those things, and what tools can I design or provide to this user that are going to make them successful within the framework of the service my organization is providing, right? We're not going to suddenly start providing doggy daycare because we know a lot of our users need to go back to the office. But we may be able to think, look, our users are actually moving back and forth between places. They're going to lose Wi-Fi. Can we provide offline support? So, right? I mean, you all probably walked in knowing some of this stuff, right? Talk to your users. Yeah, sure, UX is a process. Talk about UX, get people involved. So why are there still so many really terrible experiences? What do you think?
UX usually gets cut because of timeline or budget.
UX gets cut because of timeline or budget, yeah. Yes, sir. It relies on understanding other people, and people are hard. It's a task, right? It takes time to do. Yeah. Yes? Ooh, can you say that a little more loudly? People tend to find a lot of problems, but maybe not the correct one, not the most important one, and how do you make that judgment? Yeah, yeah. It's very easy to find problems. It's hard to know which is really going to be the most impactful. Absolutely.
There can often be a lack of humility in people assuming or thinking that they know the solution.
A lack of humility because people already know the solution. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's a lack of empathy. I think going back to what you mentioned earlier about drivers for certain people, it's not being more user-centered about your approach.
Yeah, a lack of empathy, thinking perhaps you know the answers already, so you're saying, look, I don't need to use a user-centered approach because I have the answers already. I think a lot of startups fall into that trap. I mean, a lot of big organizations fall into that trap as well. Anyone else? Yeah.
Related, but stakeholders who have, who are feature-driven.
Yeah.
They have something that they absolutely are convinced is needed.
Yeah, stakeholders who are feature-driven. So I know I need this widget, right? And not talking about the problems you're trying to solve or the users you're trying to enable, but the widget, right? And then you end up with a platform that has a lot of widgets, but doesn't really do the thing you need it to do.
Kind of like these guys are saying that everyone's so different, and that as people get their own aspect.
Yeah, everyone is different. It reminds me of Monty Python, The Life of Brian, where everyone's like, yes, we're all individuals, but they're all like chanting in unison. Yeah, everyone's different, and that's also really hard. Like, how do you determine with so much individuality, like what is the right thing that's going to cover the broadest base of your users, right? That's going to be the most impactful, not for that specific individual, who may be, right, the CMO of a very important customer, right? But that is challenging. How do you make these decisions? Like, I'm not going to say that's easy. Do you have something?
Introducing the bias or predisposition in the interviewing or the user research phase.
Yep, bias, right? Like, do you think windshield wipers on cars are important? 60% said yes, so we should spend all of our money on windshield wipers, right? Without thinking about what might some of the other options be, right? You introduced bias based on the question you're asking, assuming that was the most important thing. Bias in terms of the audience you talk to, right? Certainly diversity of audience in every flavor of what that means, right? In terms of position, in terms of gender, in terms of nationality, language, right? All of those things is becoming more important, and I think becoming a much more of a discussion in the user experience world. Like, we certainly have not solved it, but I'm really happy that it's something that we're now talking about as part of our research. Anyway, yeah, all of these are great examples of this, right? Everything I talked about just before like, I don't want to like denigrate my field or anything, but like, it's not like talking to users and having empathy is like rocket science, right? But it's really hard, and there are some definite roadblocks that are put in place. We don't have time. It's too expensive. We need something right now. We don't have time to do research. I've been in this business for 20 years, and I know what I'm doing. Love that one. We're not ready, right? We haven't spent enough time. We've only been working on these designs for 2 years. We're not ready to get feedback. Those are blockers we need to overcome. And while I could spend a lot of time actually talking about them, I'm not. But this is a really good presentation. I don't know Emily. I found it online, and I really like it. She structures, I'll come back to the slide in a second. For each of those things that we just talked about, each of those ideas, the problems, she has a slide where she talks about how do you overcome some of those objections, right? Sometimes they're valid, most of the time they're not, and usually there's an in-between. So I'd recommend you go and find this deck if you're having trouble getting the user into your user experience. There's some good stuff in this deck that will help you with your argument for how to overcome the objections. So let me ask you a tricky question. Who owns user experience? Do you have an opinion? You're smiling.
The user,
The user? Okay, sure.
is everybody in the company.
Everybody in the company? Ooh, all right. Anyone else?
The product team.
The product team. Okay. Okay. Anyone else want to put a stake in the ground? Be argumentative? Safe space? No? If engagement lacks, I'm going to start telling jokes again. So, to your benefit to raise your hand. All right. I agree. It is much more than just designing. Oh, wait. Yeah, all right. So what is UX, right? Going back to the definition, it is so much more than just designing for a screen. The user experience is impacted by decisions made across the organization, from the boardroom to a way a developer codes for performance, right? It is short-sighted to think you can have a user experience designer, send them off into the corner to design things, and voila, you're going to have a great user experience. If the CEO is not investing in the product organization for the tooling they need, right? If the product team isn't creating space for discovery, that can be collaborative discovery, right? If the customer success team isn't helping the designers and the product team talk to customers, if the developers just don't care, right? If they're being measured by the number of Jira tickets, so I worked for an organization where the bonuses for the developers was based on the number of Jira tickets delivered. Where's the incentive for them to deliver quality, right? It's crazy, right? But if user experience is not incentivized from the boardroom, from the executive team all the way down through the intern, it's going to be really hard to do. It's not something that you can create in isolation. That's really important. It's something in consulting I struggled against, because the idea was, hey, we're going to call these consultants, here's a project, go do this thing in isolation, and you're going to make this little box that's going to fit into this bigger, diorama. And that little box was really pretty and great. But it was just like, I was redesigning the steering wheel when the rest of the car was designed by lots of other people without the goal of, I need to get from point A to point B. So let's talk about the UX design process. This is the way, how am I doing on time? Ooh, all right, good. This is what it used to be. Probably looks familiar, right? I don't need to go through it. It's fairly simple. This is the way I want to talk about it. And again, this is not just your UX team doing this. This is the organization and how they approach creating a product, or how they approach solving a problem, right? The UX process is a process for solving problems. We can apply it towards digital products, which is where I spend my life, but it doesn't have to be. So, discover, define, develop, deliver. This is something that was developed by the UK's Design Council, which is great. I've slightly redesigned it, but you might have heard from other places about the double diamond. If you Google double diamond, you're going to see a bunch of examples of this, from simple to complex. Great quote. So it's easy to jump into features first. By structuring your conversations with hypotheses, you force the team to think through the context first, and especially the problem you are trying to solve. Because too often, I think we heard from somewhere over here, people have the solution, I think it was you, people have the solution already before they discuss what is the problem they're actually trying to solve, and then the train's left the station, right? So This process contains the space for determining which features to work on. The focus makes any feature discussion more productive, more targeted, and ultimately more relevant to your customers. So what is it? So the first part of the diamond is about, right, designing the right thing. This is where we build understanding. We go out and with empathy, we talk with internal stakeholders, with the business stakeholders, which is important. We talk with users, we talk with representative users, and we understand, like, what is the state of the world? And then we define that state. These are the problems we've seen, and we think these are the rough priority of those problems and the impact these are having on our business. What is the right problem to solve? And this is where we get great user experiences from. So this might be desk research, it might be stakeholder research, it might be user research. We are broadening our scope, right? We are embracing the world and saying, here are all of the things we need to think about. And then, right, there needs to be a line in the sand where we say, okay, with all of that information, who is the audience we actually want to target based on our understanding of impact? What are the desired outcomes of this project? Like, which is the needle we're trying to move? What is the business outcome we expect? What are the risks and assumptions? What methods should we use to measure the success based on the desired outcomes? We have a couple of hypotheses about how we might solve this. A vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare. Right? We need to put these two parts together. So we've created a vision. Let's talk about how we solve this problem. So we now have agreement, we have alignment in our organization, or we should, on this is the problem we want to solve because A, B, and C. Because business impact, because user impact. Right? That's a really critical outcome of that definition phase. We went really wide, and we came back to a point of alignment. And so now, how do we solve this problem? And this is where we get great usability, right? As we start thinking about solutions, we are all aligned on the solutions based on, we're not aligned on what is the right solution, but we're aligned on which solutions are going to solve the problem. Because we're going to come up with 100 solutions, which is great, and 50 might not be great for this problem. And so being able to be really ruthless about that, because we have alignment on the problem, saves a lot of time and tears. So we diverge again, and we embrace the whole world of solutions. And we do design sketching and prototyping and testing. We think about content, strategy, and information architecture. We collaborate with our product and our customer success on our developer peers. We get customers involved to get feedback, right? Of course, feedback on the design ideas. We do desk research. We look at what our competitors are doing. We do some analysis of them. We look at common patterns in the market, right? And we're really wide again on here, all of the different solutions that we have some idea on, and then we validate, right? We test and iterate on that world of solutions. We consolidate designs, and we consolidate the rationale from why we might choose one over the other, and we document that so that it can be like, here's why we're doing this, and here's how it can be built. We can do this in 2 hours for a small problem. We can do this in, I wouldn't say 2 years, but we can do this in like 6 months for a bigger problem, right? It's better when it's iterative, but I guess the key thing to take away is this feels like it's overwhelming because I'm showing you what the breadth is. The principle is go wide, understand the problem, get alignment with everyone on that problem, half an hour discussion maybe, depending on the size of the problem. Think about what are all of the different solutions instead of just the preconceived notions you came in with. Those might be the best solutions, but you don't know. Validate that those are the right solutions. Keep marching ahead to the next problem. Don't be afraid to open the floodgates and go wide. Draw a line in the sand and say, okay, this is what we know at the moment. How do we consolidate that down and get alignment? Make sense? It's the short version, and the challenge is for every problem you're allowed to use different methods, right? How do you create alignment? Depending on your organization, right? But making sure that you have that alignment on what is the right problem to solve before you get into solutions is really critical, right? And I think that's kind of the key for the double diamond, is creating space for discovery where you don't have to know exactly what the outcome is going to look like, but you know you're going to have, at least at first, agreement on what problem you're trying to solve. Let me see, I'm going to tell you a joke. What do you get from a pampered cow? Spoiled milk. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, not sorry. So how do we measure and improve the experience? So hopefully as you're going, so I have, it's probably too small for most of you to read, but if you're typing in questions on Slido, good news. So how do we measure, measuring and improving, right? How do we measure the experience? Too often in that definition phase, the first diamond, I guess you're facing here, the first diamond, you're defining a problem, but we never talk about how are we going to measure that success. Right? We're like, oh, here's the thing. And when we get to the end, we're like, oh, well, this number went up. Why don't we use that one? Like, let's circle the number that went up and ignore all the others. It's really important at the beginning to talk about how you're going to measure success. One, it helps you determine the solution, because you might have lots of good solutions, but one is going to impact that measure more than others, right? And when you don't have agreement on that, there's lots of fighting about, well, which is the right solution, because you're not aligned. Talk about how you're going to measure very specifically, and make sure you have the mechanisms to measure these things as they're being built. How do I know that when I walk into a hospital, if someone needs the ER versus imaging, they're going to be able to find their way? Right? How are we going to measure that? I want everyone who gets into like the front entrance of, who gets to the hospital, to be able to find the ER in under 10 seconds. And we'll be able to find the pathway to imaging in under 20 seconds. Maybe not get there, and to get there, it'll take them 2 minutes because they have to go up through the elevator or whatever, right? I have very clear KPIs. I have very clear measures for success. Again, the point is, right, it's not just about digital. I want to communicate. These are things that are like any service, any type of experience. Yeah.
So I recognize that for every company, there are going to be specific KPIs, right, based on product or service they're providing.
Sure.
But for UX, isn't there usually like a gold standard beginning set of KPIs that would like user retention, like things of that nature?
So the question is there a gold standard of UX KPIs? And the answer is no. Right? The answer is no, because of that pyramid that we talked about earlier. Right? What you're looking for is the usable, right? So time on task. I would argue that Grubhub and Facebook have very different measurements. Grubhub wants you in and out, right? They want a very low time on task once you get into the menu. Facebook wants you there for hours. And so what is meaningful for each product is an indication of what you should be measuring. And so I don't think there's a gold standard. I think you want like fewer errors. That's probably a good gold standard. But if your product is really about discovery and you stumble into something by accident, but that's a positive experience, that could be unique to you, right? So if I'm at the hospital and I stumble into free candy, but I got lost, I guess as long as I'm not going, honestly, even if I was going to the emergency room, I'd still be happy with free candy. So it really depends on what you mean by meaningful, right? And what is convenient, what is meaningful for your product.
Like the product goal metrics, or you start with the user goal metrics? So like,
Yeah, let me get into that. These are good questions, and I'm a couple of slides from this, so like it'll be better if I have the slides up. See, this is what happens. I talk about things and it's already there. But second point, did you benchmark, right? Do you know what? So you have a measure that you believe is important. Do you know what the current state is, right? Because there should be some reason that you prioritized this problem to begin with. How are you going to measure if you've actually improved the thing? And lastly, is your measurement strategy based on user outcomes? So let's talk about user outcomes, right? A KPI, you probably all know, is something that demonstrates how effectively a company is achieving a business objective. What many don't talk about are experience KPIs, UX KPIs. So there are things like page load speed, which you could, all right, sorry, I'm gonna stick to this because I get off track. I talk a lot, I warned you. So UX KPIs, right? UX KPIs are behavior-based. That's really important. It's not about something outside of the user control, right? It is something that you can measure as part of the user experience. And I'll show you examples in a second. So it's not like, is the product working correctly, right? Is there a bug? That's not a user experience KPI. Like, the number of bugs is a huge problem, but it's not something that is, like, it's something that's impacting the user experience, but it's not something about the user experience. Does that make sense? I'm stumbling on my words here. Again, I'm getting off track. I'll get to the examples in a second. It should ladder to business objectives. So, and I think that was your question. These experience KPIs are not necessarily, like a lot of business objectives are about dollar values, right? So these should ladder up to achieving dollar values of retention or a feature that will promote sales. But they're not business value driven because there are so many things that can impact business value. There could be a terrible customer success rep on the account, right? It could be that our prices went up and that impacts churn. So there are a lot of things outside of the experience that impact UX KPIs, but these are some good ones, right? UX behavior, shopping cart abandonment, right? That indicates something happened in the experience. A user did something and then they stopped their experience. What is impacting that? Time on task. We might want time on task to be really long in certain parts of our app, right, when browsing different restaurants, and we might want it to be shorter in other parts like checkout. And that's fine. And as you're thinking about what problem you're trying to solve, you need to understand what is the right KPI for this problem. And you might want very high level, like we want time on task. User satisfaction is, an okay one, right? You want user satisfaction at a global level, and then in each of your verticals or different parts of your platform, you might have different measurements. Self-reported performance. So, like satisfaction, asking user, how did you enjoy that experience? I wouldn't personally ask that, but it's an example. Task success rate, search versus navigation. We want users to be navigating directly. We believe search is really a crutch. It means people can't find what they're looking for, right? That is a wild exaggeration, but as an example, our organization might believe that. Returning users, right? How many users are returning because the first time they came, they found something they liked? That's a good indicator. Sharing, right? Sharing is a very specific behavior users have. If we want to incentivize sharing, if that's what our organization is really about, right? Are we enabling that? And are customers demonstrating the sharing behavior, and how do we measure that? And then if they're not, right, what is the problem? Right, going into what is the problem with sharing? How are we doing it across our platform? Here are the users we want to share more. Let's design solutions. Let's come up with a variety of solutions for how we incentivize sharing more, and let's build one of those and test it and see if it works. Page load time is not a UX KPI. It impacts the user experience, right? But it's a developer thing, right? It's our system thing that we know we need to fix. And while it's important, it doesn't measure a behavior. Same with time on page, right? It's not a behavior. Basket value, profit margin, right? These things are important for a business, but they don't indicate if the user experience is successful or not. So I'm not advocating that we don't measure these things, to be clear, because typically these things are frequently measured. I'm advocating that we also think about behavioral-driven KPIs as well. That make sense? All right. Cool, flying through it. All right, so what's the point, right? So we're doing all this stuff. I'm talking about all this stuff up here. We have a pretty good definition of what a UX is and kind of the things that are important. We've talked really briefly about the UX process, right? The double diamond and how you go from wide to small, and really the value is around alignment around the problem you're solving, or alignment around the solution you've chosen to implement. And we've talked about measuring user experience and how it's different perhaps than a marketing team or a product team might what they believe is important to measure, right? I'm constantly advocating for in all my organizations right now even, right, a benchmarking study around task success. So we know what is the current state of the experience and where do we need to improve, which is very different from we need this new feature, which is going to unlock this additional revenue. What am I trying to do as a UX professional, right? And you, whether you want to become UX professionals or at least step into part of that role. The first thing is a common understanding of people, of your users and their needs. I'm sure you've all been working on some projects where you get to the middle, you have some solution, and you're arguing about this widget or that widget, and it's because underlying that conversation, you haven't actually agreed on who you're trying to solve and what the problem is. I have problems when I go into meetings and we talk about we're going to solve for marketers, right? I don't know if any of you are marketers, but a marketer is this big. There are so many different kinds of marketers. It blew my mind when I first started creating B2B products for marketing teams. They do so many different things. It's like saying, I want to create something for drivers. Right? I'm guessing we all drive very differently. So we need to create an understanding of people and their needs, and we need to do this very early in the process, because it bites us in the butt if we don't. We need to generate an organizational alignment on the vision. So once we know who we're trying to solve for and we understand what what drives them? What are their behaviors? What are their needs and their goals? As an organization, we have a vision for how we want to solve for them, right? And we're aligned on that. If the CEO is not aligned on that vision and you present the thing, he's like, or she is like, well, what is this, right? That's problematic. These things have happened. We need to deliver a detailed definition of an experience that can be implemented. So a couple of words in there, right? Detailed matters because oftentimes as an idea goes from idea to execution, stuff happens in the black box in the middle. So being very detailed, whether that's the designer or the PM, being really detailed about what are the things that matter, a definition of that experience, and making sure that design and development or design and architecture and engineering, whoever it is, right, the people kind of creating that vision, the people delivering on that vision are on the same page and they're involved. Because it's no bueno to create a thing that can't be built or is going to be built in a bastardized version because we didn't have empathy for the developers or the engineers, right? Because I had a failing of not getting them involved early. Not understanding that their KPIs are getting this done by Tuesday as opposed to delivering the best thing possible. I want to implement a useful, usable, and desirable experience, right? Not just thinking about the bottom of that pyramid, but thinking about how do we, as we're solving this problem, make sure that we're pushing for like the crown of the forest, right? We are trying to get to the top of that pyramid, and even if we don't do all of it, we're at least like doing little bits or a sliver to get us there. Usable is table stakes, right? Usable is not enough anymore, certainly in a crowded digital market, where startups are coming out of nowhere, right, every day. And lastly, create the infrastructure to measure for continuous improvement. So also, frequently, we create these things and we say, here's how we're going to measure it, and then we don't actually have the tools in place to measure them. Think about that early, right? Make that part of the engineering process, the development process. Here's how we're going to measure these things, and you are spending time, you have it in your product plan to build that infrastructure to measure for every project. So what does that get you, right? In my mind, if you follow this sage guidance, okay, but kidding, not kidding, right? But like, what does this enable? Like, what's the point of doing all of these things? We say, yeah, like it makes sense. Talk to your users, build these things, measure the experience. Like we all know that. But the more we can talk about the outcomes of that, the more we're enabled to follow this process. It saves money. It saves money. I have been able to really understand a problem, go back to a client and say, look, like this is actually the problem, not this. If you build this, you're going to waste money on it, right? You're going to spend a year building a thing that no one's going to use. I've been able to do that on a smaller feature as well, right? This is what I believe the outcome is. Look, I've actually gone out and I said 5 people are using this thing. If we change it, I don't think it's going to have a major impact. This is another thing. Let's work on that. That saves money. It saves time, right? You spend a year building a thing that no one uses. You spend a week building a thing no one's going to use, right? If you're able to spend time, right, in an earlier phase, defining what is the right problem, validating solutions, you're not going to get to the end of X amount of time and say, oh, that wasn't useful. I do encourage you to do that in much quicker sprints, right? Like if you're able to do this in a couple of days, a week to create and validate, awesome. But by just ignoring this overall, you waste money, you waste time, and more importantly, I think, right, talking about like my dream, right, my vision that I mentioned earlier of making better marketers, you lose loyalty, right? It's really hard to gain trust. It's really hard to gain loyalty of the things that you build. So doing it right the first time, spending the time to really understand the impact of the things you're building is going to have long-term consequences, right? Beneficial long-term consequences. So that's my pitch. My soapbox. I could talk about this stuff literally for weeks, and it's very high level. I don't think UX is in the boxes and lines and words on the page, right? I don't know if you were coming here to learn about how to design, right? That is another class we could go into. UX is not about the boxes and lines and words, right? It is, but those are only in service of the problems that we've identified and the solution we believe is going to have an impact. So these are some resources for you. I have the top one, a list of UX tools, is collated by someone else, but it is a massive list of tooling organized by the function. The second is a book list I created on Amazon. I don't get any money for it. Like, I have no tie to it. It's just like, these are some good books to start with. So yeah, like no, just it's there for you if you like it or not. Let me see. What did the cannibal get when he was late to the dinner party?
The tailbone?
The cold shoulder. I like that one. Cool. Okay. I'll tell one more. What do you call the elves who work at the North Pole? Subordinate clauses. Yeah. All right, cool. So that is it. All right, sweet, 15 minutes. I'm going to jump into Slido. Are there questions in there? All right. Okay, so so Slido, if you want to keep asking questions, so there's a question there from Brendan. How do you personally synthesize and present learnings from research to the broader organization? I think that's a tough question. It's definitely something I struggle with, but is constantly on my mind is how do you give research visibility? It's very easy to go off, do research, come up back with some insights, and then continue working on the thing. Sharing information, I'm up on my soapbox again, democratizing data is really key and a really important task for a designer that often gets overlooked. So having our product analytics be available to everyone in the organization, having a research repository that anyone in the organization can look at to see what did people say about this part of the product, about this feature, right? And the key there is making sure that everyone is sharing as well. We have so much information in our heads, but none of that is shared. Or it's shared like, oh, you know what, I think last year some guy on this call mentioned this thing, but how many people actually mentioned it, right? So democratizing data is really critical. And so, I think the question was, how do I share? I would love it if that information is just shared, right? And so I don't have to present every day, every week, every month about what's going on. But I also know that as we do research, I want my team and I want myself to present regularly because I want that visibility. Because I want people coming to me, and instead of just making assumptions, come to me and say, hey, Ari, what does your team know about this? And we become more involved, right? I want to be the bedrock for all product discussions. Product team doesn't yet agree, but they will. So I believe in democratizing data so that I don't have to be in the middle, but I do want to present. And how do designers keep the user experience at the center of design when so many people in the organization want? Oh, is that a different question? How do you personally synthesize and present learnings from research to the broad organization? So we'll do it in project meetings. So with development and product and a few stakeholders, we'll have that. And then one of the things I want to get to is for larger insights, let's say a quarterly meetings, a presentation of here are the insights we have from this quarter. Here's what that looks like against previous quarters. Or is there anything new? Yes, sir.
Just a question on that. Do you share transcripts and raw data like that?
Typically, no. We have Gong. We can. I don't like sitting through all of those. I would much rather someone synthesize and share the insights. There are times where there is some sensitive information in those calls that we don't want to share. But for the most part, I'm happy to. But if you listen to one call, you don't get the broader insights. And I think part of the value of a researcher, whether that's the product or designer or customer success person playing that researcher, is they can consolidate all of the information for people and look at the trends, which is really the important part. It's not that one phone call or the two phone calls. It's the trends that we're seeing across each of those. And all of those different channels as well. So we may be having phone calls, we may have product analytics, we may have survey info, we may also be out at conventions and conferences and be getting feedback there. I want to triangulate insights from across those, and there's value in someone being the point person for taking that and saying, here's what we're seeing, instead of expecting everyone to do it. The next question is, how do designers keep the user experience at the center of the design when so many people in the organization want different things? Yeah, so I think it's by following that process of saying, look, we're not going to talk about solutions right now. I want everyone in the room to agree this is the right problem to solve, right? And we're going to do that by first going out and doing a little bit of discovery and coming to that, right, where we've gone broad, and now we're all going to get together and say, look, here's the data we have. This is from the win-loss data. This is from product marketing. This is from our product analytics. This is our assumptions. This is what our usability tests are telling us. Do we agree on the problems? Right? Here are the people, right? Here are the customer accounts that are talking about these things. We're going to make a decision based on this real feedback instead of assumptions, right? Instead of, well, look, I've been doing this 20 years, or like I heard one person saying this. So creating that alignment is, I think, a core way of bringing users into that decision-making process. And then also getting, as you design and people are providing input around solutions, bringing users in again and getting validation. So as you're narrowing down on the second diamond, if this is the solution we're going to go forward with, being able to substantiate that decision with user data. One of the things I think that designers are coming to understand better is that we need to be data people. And we're not normally, right? But for us to get the things done that we want to do, we need to use data to convince people. We need to use qualitative data or quantitative data to substantiate this is the reason we've made this decision. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot of, well, I thought this, I thought this, I thought this. If I go out and I say, look, I talked to 8 people, 7 out of 8 said this was a real problem, and here's the thing that really matters. Like, the other people in the room, like, they can have an opinion, but that's much harder than, look, I'm a designer, I think this is a better solution. It's a no-win for me. All right, how designers keep, hopefully that explains that. UX student, as a hiring manager, what are some of the important hard and soft skills you look for in future candidates that aren't the most obvious? I think it's important to be able to show that you're capable of designing something, right, and have somewhat competent design. More importantly, what sets people apart is being able to explain the rationale for those designs. Very frequently, designers, and particularly junior designers, say, I made this, there's a drop down here, there's a button here, there's this, there's this, there's this. They explain what they did, not why they did it, right? As you become more senior, you're able to talk about the data, right? Well, all right, so even before the data, you're able to talk about how this solves a user problem, right? This is a business problem. We decided this was the problem. So you can see I added all the stuff here, but really the 2 key things I want you to focus on are this drop down, right, which now allows users to access these things, which was a struggle before that was impacting our time on task, and this thing here, right? So you're talking about why. And then bringing in additional data, say, hey, that's a really good question. As we tested, actually 5 users said this would be able to enhance this thing. And as you remember, like this thing was the thing we agreed on was the most important thing that we're measuring. So junior designers are good about explaining what they did, not why they did it. And even a level above is how do you bring in data. The other thing that while I'm interviewing, which I think the question was, is empathy and understanding. Good questions, right? When I interview, I really love designers, like people who I'm interviewing who ask me questions. Not just about the job, but like, so I'll ask, hey, like, why did you, tell me about your last job? And like, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about this thing? Oh, so here's the answer. Like, I'm interested, why are you digging into that? Is there something more I can explain, right? So by asking questions, by digging in, or by listening and repeating back, you're showing empathy for me, right, or the people who are interviewing you, and that's a good sign for a designer. It shows you're listening, right, and digging in and trying to understand the user experience you're having. So I don't know if all hiring managers are like that, but I certainly like that inquisitiveness during interviews. Have you been in situations where you thought you understood the problem and built for it, and in the end turned out it wasn't useful? Yes. Absolutely. It sucks. Absolutely. Frequently, it tends to be in a waterfall situation where, we're consulting, we have a certain amount of time to deliver a thing. We've scoped out, these are the exact steps we're going to take, so we need to run through it. The best information we had said, when you get to the end, this is going to work. And when you build a big thing and you spend 6 months on it, right, and you have to rush through it because that's how much the customer is paying, you're taking some risks. By breaking that up into smaller chunks, by advising, hey, like, we need to validate these ideas, you reduce the risk, right? That last slide with, like, you reduce, like, the potential cost, you reduce the amount of time, you're reducing the risk of getting to the end of something. There's still going to be a time where you're going to build some things and it doesn't work out, right? It may be you didn't really understand what was convenient for people. You have the right problem, you just don't have the right solution. So the agile process of failing fast is great in this case. And sometimes you can test it with paper prototypes. Sometimes you can test it with, like, we've added a button that says, look, calculate this thing for me. And we're doing it on the back end. We haven't built it yet, but we're seeing, like, do people actually have the appetite for it? And there are going to be times where you're going to build it and it's not going to work, and you're going to try and understand why, and you're going to understand, like, do we need to continue pursuing this or not? It happens. The best you can do is to try and work quickly, validate assumptions, validate risks, and and build that into the process. And there are going to be times where you fail, and that's okay. I think the question is, what do you do next, right? Like, how do you pick yourself up again? The Batman quote. What do we do when we fall? Yeah, I think some of certainly like some of the, maybe not like to be built, some of my best moments where we've gotten through the process, through design, not through development, we've created a solution, we realize it's wrong. Like, those are some of my best moments where I've proved value to the organization, right? We have failed, we had an idea and it's not gonna work. We're not gonna spend 6 months building this thing. We're not gonna spend all of this money. Look at all of the other opportunities we have that we could work on because this thing sucks. And it sucks not because it's bad designers, not because it was bad product, it's just, it wasn't a right fit. And so I think failing early in the design process is a tremendous value to organizations. And I wish we could do it more, right? I wish we could celebrate it. Because the times that it's happened, I felt really good about what we've done, and really I believe that we've had a great impact on the organization. Cool, answered that. Pros and cons of Figma. Figma and XD. In the end, I don't care. Design tools are design tools. You can design in Keynote if you want. I mean, it's not going to be great. What's important is what you communicate. I think Figma is really good for what they solve for is making collaboration easy, making it in the cloud. I think to some extent components were a little easier in Sketch. I haven't really used XD. I don't think, everyone has their tools. It's like the pros and cons of Word versus Google Docs. You're still able to create the thing, right? For specialists, it matters. Right, the great soccer players will say this soccer ball curves a little bit or whatever. For me, it's all the same, right? I'm still able to kick around and have fun with friends. So if you're at that level, right, you probably already know. And if you're not, don't get hung up on the tools. Also, Adobe just bought Figma. I'm sure everyone saw. So lots of designers crying. Spilled milk. How many people should you speak with in order to ensure you understand the user needs? 1 is better than none. 2 is better than 1. 100 feels like a lot. I think there's no goal. There's a rule that's now 20 years old that says speak to 7 people. It was based on usability, not on discovery. Keep talking to people if you're learning new things. If you're talking to people and they keep saying the same things after 4 people, and you think you have diversity of participants, be like, hey, I have a good idea here. How big is the risk? If this is something you're going to spend 2 years on, make pretty damn sure you've talked, you're not learning anything new. But I think a good rule is if you keep talking to people and you're hearing basically 70-80% of what they're saying is the same thing, you can move forward. And there's no risk in continuing to talk to people as you've made decisions, right, and adjust along the way. But I think that's my advice. If you're still learning new things and you believe you have good diversity of your audience, keep talking to people. We have 1 minute left. I'll try and answer these quickly. For small business and startups, what do you recommend for user research interviews, consulting agencies, things to consider when going? For small businesses and startups, I would recommend doing it yourself if you can. The thing about consultancies is they know what they're doing, but you also lose a lot of the data. Right, someone else who is not critical to your business now owns all of the headspace around what your users need. And they're going to give you a big, thud, heavy on the desk document, but it's not the same. There's no, what's the word? Being in the room is critical, right? Listening, you can tell the difference being on a Zoom call versus being in the room with people. I'm not as funny on Zoom. People have said, I don't believe them, but there's something about being there first person, listening to how it is that you can't even get from a transcript. So I would say, if you can, you should do it because it's a high risk, right? If you're making decisions, critical business decisions on this thing, even for a small startup, take ownership. You might have someone help you with operations. Recruiting sucks. Get someone to help you with that. You might have an expert come in and say, hey, help us with scripting. Or maybe you do the interviews, but we want to sit in. But be in the room. I'm not a big fan of having hired guns do research, particularly if they're not going to be involved throughout the design process. That's not to say there aren't amazing researchers, right? I know many. I just don't, it's a hard trade-off, right? And if you have that money, because typically it's expensive, like if you have a contractor who's going to be with you for 6-7 months, like as a long-term, like individual contractor versus an agency, that's different. I'm rambling. That data is really, really precious. Don't let it walk out the door. Where do you see the future of UX UI with emerging AI? Yeah, so that's actually a really relevant question because one of my organizations, we're a little over. All right, I won't be offended if you have to leave. My organization builds products that uses very heavily leverages AI. Our biggest challenge is not the AI, it's getting people to trust it. The AI, the machine learning, is a black box, and it is really, really effective at what it does. But people can't see it, and they don't believe it, and they're really hesitant to use it. And so from a very human perspective, one of my biggest challenges is getting people to believe in a thing. The thing works. The bottom of the pyramid is stable, right? But it's the meaningfulness, the understanding of it, like the top of the pyramid that we need to solve for. Like, how do we get people to understand this is actually going to be great, and you need to trust it? And here's how you measure it. Here's how you can kind of sneak in and test it, right? And dip your toe in the water and say, you know what, this is actually going to be really beneficial for me. It's not something that like an engineer is going to be able to say, oh yeah, like this is a problem. The engineering is building a really functional thing. And sometimes we have to recognize that humans are irrational, and talking about AI in particular, like we need to design for the irrationality of humanity and solving for that problem, which is fascinating and is going to be years and years of job security. All right, cool. If you are on Slido, I'm going to open a poll. You might see it now with the questions. What is one thing I could do to improve my presentation? Or any good jokes. If you have a time, I'd appreciate you filling it out. Thank you for your time and patience. I hope you're all enjoying Startup Week. This is such a great opportunity, so I'm really pleased to be here and pleased that you all are here. Good luck with your next ventures.